It's a tradition unlike any other. We are looking at Pete Prisco's draft regrades.
Yeah, so every 3 years, our guy Pete Prisco takes some time to kind of sit back and reflect, and then he regrades the draft. So now he's taking a look back at 2020 and regrading that draft. And Pete said it himself, this is a direct quote from Pete, "At least I can admit when I'm wrong." So we're going to check in with Pete in just a moment and hold him accountable on that statement. But back to the 2020 draft, it turned out to be a great one for the Cincinnati Bengals. Of course, picking Joe Burrow, #1 overall, the star quarterback leading the Bengals to the Super Bowl in 2022. That was the first time since 1989. Joe Cool having back-to-back record-breaking seasons for the Bengals. During Cincy's Super Wildcard Weekend win over the Ravens in January, Burrow broke the franchise career completions mark that was previously held by Ken Anderson. And of course, the entire city of Cincinnati now also wearing those Cartier rectangular pink glasses that he wears at his press conferences. All right, getting a look at some notable names from the 2020 NFL Draft in the first round. You got Joe Burrow, Chase Young, Justin Herbert, Tristan Wirfs, CeeDee Lamb, and Justin Jefferson. All of these guys here listed made the Pro Bowl since that 2020 draft. All right, and we're getting a look at some of those regrades. We have them in the wall. The Bengals and the Chargers, in your opinion, Pete, they're moving in the right direction. And on the other side of that, we have the Jets and my beloved Jacksonville Jaguars from 2020 to 2023 going in the wrong direction. So we're going to kind of dive in, go team by team for some of the big ones. But we're going to kick things off with the Bengals, of course. An A+ from Pete Prisco, I mean, that holds a lot of weight, Pete.
Well, when you look at this franchise and the way it was going and heading, it entirely changed the landscape of the franchise.
Yeah.
You get Joe Burrow first and foremost. I mean, it's a great pick. Look, we all would have made Joe Burrow the pick. It's not hard to do, but they got him.
Right.
But then they followed it up. You get T. Higgins in the second round, and I'll be honest with you, I didn't think T. Higgins, I admitted this because I regrade myself in this.
Yes.
I didn't think he'd be what he's become. Now they're talking about trying to find a way to keep him, which is the wise thing to do. And then you get the leader of your defense, Logan Wilson. He's the guy who calls the signals on that defense. He's a big part of what they do on that side of the ball. So they got a couple other guys that are backups. They had a great draft. This changed the entire trajectory of that franchise. The Bengals are a legitimate team now, and every year going forward, we're going to sit here and we're going to say, they are contenders in the AFC because of Joe Burrow.
And you know what? I was living in Cincinnati, Pete, from 2016 to 2018-19, so literally right before the Joe Burrow era. It was Andy Dalton, Marvin Lewis, and it's literally a whole new look for them. And you mentioned T. Higgins, that you didn't love that pick. At what point when you're watching the Bengals after this draft, are the wheels kind of turning and you're saying, maybe I was wrong? When did that happen?
Probably year two.
Okay.
I mean, and that's the greatness of doing this, is you go back and you can regrade yourself, which I do.
Yeah.
I mean, I go back and I say, I didn't like him, I liked him, I'm wrong, I was right. And so I can, it's a good way to humble yourself when you do these draft evaluations.
Exactly. If anything, you're self-aware,
Yeah.
Pete. Okay, so moving on, we're going to talk about the Dolphins. Their previous grade was an A-. The new grade is a B. And I love talking about the Dolphins with you. You always admit where you've been wrong. But this is the draft where they picked Tua, #5 overall. Obviously, still a lot of questions surrounding Tua with the concussions and all of that, of course. But there were some other picks in this draft, Pete, that you mentioned were a major miss for you.
Yeah, well, Noah Igbenogany, the cornerback out of Auburn. In fact, he was the captain of my Better Than team. I thought he was going to be a big-time starting corner in this league, playmaker. It didn't work out for him. It just hasn't. He's been on the field, and he's been bad when he's been on the field, and at times he's been nothing more than a backup. That's a major whiff. Austin Jackson has been battling injuries his entire career. They're talking about him being the right tackle this year. There's concerns about him. They drafted him to be a left tackle. Didn't work out. The best picks, though, are 39, 56, and 70. Robert Hunt has become their best offensive lineman. Raekwon Davis is a big part of their defense in the interior. And Brandon Jones, when he's on the field, and he didn't play much last year because he was hurt, he's a starting safety. This is a good bottom end of the draft, but the problem is you had two premium picks to go with Tua, and there are questions still about Tua. Let's be real. I mean, health-wise, that's why this draft got downgraded a little bit.
Yeah, in this draft, there's obviously a lot of quarterbacks. We showed the graphic. You got Burrow, Tua, and this next one.
By the way, they should have taken Herbert instead of Tua.
Yeah.
I'm big on that. Right from the start, I said that.
Let's talk about the Chargers and Herbert, because when we showed the graphic, they were one of the teams that were their grade is improving from a B- to an A. And you were saying this draft for them is all about Herbert. You saw his talent, but it was the consistency for you, and he's proved that, at least in your opinion.
I think he's a star quarterback.
Yeah.
He's one of the elite of the elite. I mean, there's only so many guys that you can win with and not win because of, and he is a win with. And that, changes this franchise just like Joe Burrow did for, when you look what Joe Burrow's done for the Bengals. Now, the Chargers have been around when they had Phillip Rivers. They were a good football team, but he gives them staying power, and that's what you want. But the rest of this draft, look, Kenneth Murray's been a good, solid linebacker. The rest of this draft, they didn't get a lot out of it. I mean, they drafted 2 wide receivers they thought would be in the rotation. Neither one of them worked out that way. Kelly has been little more than a backup running back. Gilman has been great value when you look at him. He's been a guy who's played in the back end of that secondary, played a lot of football, and been great value for them. But this is all about Justin Herbert and Kenneth Murray. You get two quality starters, one a star, one a good player.
All right, we're going to go to the Eagles. Their original grade was a C+. Now they're a B+. And you were saying their first-round pick, they flopped, but they got Jalen Hurts in the second round. So that kind of makes up for it. That's why they're a B+ and not a worse grade than that. But initially, with that Jalen Hurts pick, you were calling it a luxury pick.
Well, and it was when they picked it. And kudos to them for doing it, because it's worked out in a big way. They must have known something which has played out true with Carson Wentz. He wasn't their guy for the long term. Jalen Hurts comes in. He is their franchise quarterback. And so when you evaluate this draft, they blew it on Jalen Reagor. Let's be real. That was Justin Jefferson sitting on the board, and they took Jalen Reagor. Now Jalen Reagor is now with the Vikings as well. It didn't work out. But you come back and you get Jalen Hurts. Let's say we flipped this draft and Jalen Hurts went 21 and Reagor went 53. You'd still say, oh, it's a great draft because they got their quarterback. So it becomes a good draft. Wallace has become a starter and a guy who's going to compete for a job this year. And Jack Driscoll's played a lot of football as a backup who has started at times as well. This was a good, solid draft. But it was a great draft because they got Jalen Hurts.
Yeah, that worked out for them, of course, and then Hurts signing that massive contract in the offseason as well. All right, next up, we're going to talk about the Colts. They're also now an A. They went from a B- to an A now, hopefully with their new franchise quarterback. But let's talk about the draft. Initially, you didn't like the Jonathan Taylor pick there in the second round, but he's proving to be a great back in the league, Pete.
Yeah, here's the thing about the Colts draft when you look at it. If they solve the quarterback position, which they think they have done with Anthony Richardson, then this team, based on this draft, has a lot of talent. They traded for DeVaris Buckner in the first round, so they traded and got that big, massive body on their defensive line with their first round pick. Then they come back and get Pittman, starting wide receiver, Taylor, star running back, Blackman, starting safety, Pinter, backup guard, Isaiah Rodgers, who they also drafted, is a starting cornerback right now. So they got a lot of players and a lot of starters and a lot of big-time contributors in this draft. So if the quarterback position is solved, and I kind of say that when I talk about how good this draft was for those teams that did get the quarterbacks, the Colts are going to be a good football team because of drafts like this.
Yeah, and so far we've been talking about teams maybe have moved from a B to an A or an A to a B, and now we're going with the team that's just going in the totally different direction. The Raiders going from a B to an F. And really, Pete, this draft, it just shows that off the field things and character can really impact the future of a franchise. This
is the stuff that a lot of us don't have privy to the information on guys before the draft. So it's hard to evaluate. You hear things before the draft, but you can't really put it into context. Henry Ruggs, obviously, terrible story. There's a death involved. It's just a bad situation. Damon Arnett had a bunch of off-the-field issues. Those guys are no longer with the team. Lynn Bowden, when he got there was some issues with him, supposedly, with the Raiders. Brian Edwards, no longer with the team. Nobody's, aside from Amik Robertson, is with the Raiders. This was Mike Mayock draft, but I want to give Mike Mayock a little bit of a pass here because everybody you talk to says it was John Gruden. And John Gruden had the impact on all the drafts. So when Mayock took the criticism, a lot of it was John Gruden. So terrible draft for the Raiders.
And speaking of terrible drafts, we're going to talk about the Lions, Jags, Jets, and the Titans. All of these teams getting a D- in their regrade, you see the original grades. The Jets going from a B+ to a D-. Same with the Jags, Lions, Titans, and then obviously we just talked about the Raiders. But I think a common theme with all of these teams, Pete, is that either the guys that they picked in the draft, they're no longer on the roster, they're on another team, or they're just not a starter in general.
Yeah, and look, you could have given the Jaguars an F easily when you have 2 first-round picks. 2, they had C.J. Henderson, no longer with the team. Kayvon Chason barely gets on the field. He's a backup. Shenault, no longer with the team. But 2 guys that kind of bring it up a little bit are Hamilton, who's just got a new contract extension, starting nose tackle, and Ben Barch, who would have been the starting left guard, got hurt last year. Questions about him coming back. The rest of these guys, there's still some guys on the roster, Claybrooks, Quarterman, Thomas, but they probably won't be after this summer. So I think it's a draft when you look at it. If you blow 2 first-round picks the way they did, that impacts your franchise. And that's why I think drafting Trevor Lawrence the way they did helped save them.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to get to some consistency in the picks. We're going to talk about the Packers. They were a D. They're still a D. They had 9 picks in that draft. 2 of those are for sure starters for Green Bay, Jordan Love being one of them. And obviously still some questions around him. There's going to be a lot of eyes on Jordan Love for this upcoming season to kind of see what happens there, Pete.
Yeah, if we look at this grade a year from now, it might change because it's all about Jordan Love.
Right.
Not unlike what Jalen Hurts has done for the Eagles grade. If Jordan Love goes in, and I think he's going to play pretty well, to be honest with you. I didn't like this pick when it happened. It was another one of those luxury picks at the time. You know, they could have had receivers to help, or a receiver to help Aaron Rodgers. Maybe that whole thing doesn't play out that way. They picked Jordan Love. A.J. Dillon, he's a backup essentially. The tight end is backup. These guys are the only really good quality pick in that group is John Runyon, who's been a good NFL guard in this league. So when you look at it, they missed. They missed on a lot of guys, and I think for that reason, I think you have to put this all under we'll see, because if Jordan Love is good, great draft. If he's not any good, it goes even lower. It's a terrible draft.
Yeah, and it just seems like Green Bay never wants to draft receivers for whatever reason. So yeah, that was your regrade for the 2020 draft. We were talking about where we were. Obviously, that was the COVID draft. We were all at home watching. It's like a core memory of the pandemic.
You know, it's funny. We were all home.
Yeah.
And we all watched the draft from home. We all did our work from home. And the NFL people now make that as an excuse for this draft because they didn't get to go out and evaluate these guys anymore after the combine. It was a limited scouting time. But you know what I say? No. No excuses. You had the tape. The tape always tells the story. Always tells the story, except for the Raiders, because we couldn't possibly predict that.
I mean, for the Bengals and the Chargers, it worked out for them. So
one quick note.
Okay.
And I know we weren't talking about them. The Vikings got an A in my grade. It dropped down to a B+, in large part because Rick Spielman now works with us, and I will not give him an A on the regrade. And he drafted Justin Jefferson in that draft, which is a great draft. But he missed on the second first-round pick he had, which was Jeff Gladney. So B+ for Rick Spielman.
You know,
can't give him an A.